So I see civilization as the coming together of a number of elements: a social contract, the rule of law, an ability to organize an economy, and to bring all these elements together successfully. And a successful society provides prosperity, comfort, respect, and safety for its people. So I see the Egyptian civilization as one of the main birthplaces of all civilizations of the world, because of the miracle of the Nile and that moment in the Earth's history when the peoples that became Egyptians migrated to the Nile and saw that they could build the mother civilization there. So if anything, the Egyptian civilization is a textbook. It is the original code for all the civilizations that came afterwards. So I've always admired this museum, and what I love about the museum is that it compresses in a very intense way the whole span of Egypt's civilization, and indeed its effects on other civilizations, all in one majestic room. And that now, with the addition of the textile gallery, and of course, who could miss, especially children, the mummies gallery, you have this extraordinary, powerful effect on the visitor. And when I walk through the museum, the word that comes to mind is wonder. Wonder at just how extraordinary Egypt has been in terms of its length of its history, but also the sophistication of all the civilizations that have come since the beginning. So I see the center of British civilization being based on two pillars, the rule of law and mutual respect. And what is interesting about British civilization is that Britain has no constitution. It only has a body of laws, and it has a social contract which is based upon respect. If I look at the comparison between Egypt and the United Kingdom, I see similarly a real reverence for law and a real reverence for people and for the mutual bonds that join us together, and that people ultimately should feel safe and comfortable with one another. So I would see the characteristic of a Brit, as we call them, would be somebody who has a real sense of determination, of courage, and a curiosity. And of course, famously, the British took that determination, that courage, and that curiosity and went abroad around the world, and they did that on the basis of trade, and they did that on the basis of mutual prosperity. So these three elements helped us become extremely wealthy as a country by going around the world using trade as the way that we did so. The idea of technology in civilization is an idea of specialization. And you find, I think, if you have a basis of prosperity and you have communities coming together to be able to share their goods and to share the wealth from those goods, you create a space. And you create a space for people to specialize and to be able to refine generation after generation techniques which often start by accident, by curiosity, by a spirit of scientific inquiry. So that is how technology flourishes in civilization, from a strong basis of prosperity through a social contract and giving space to people to specialize in the parts of the economy they wish to specialize in, and to explore how to improve a technique and to turn that technique generation after generation into something very refined. If you don't have specialization and everybody is doing the same thing, then there's no time or space for a person to develop the curiosity, the skills of exploration that are required for technological advancement. The best way to approach this intellectual contribution is through stories about two people. And I think the two I would choose, first of all, would be Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, who is commonly known as the Bard, or the national poet, who was born in the 16th century and wrote many plays and sonnets, poems, and became famous all around the world for really arousing the emotions of people, making people feel that they connected with his stories. So he was the ultimate storyteller. The other person I would call to mind is in the 17th century, and it's Isaac Newton. And Isaac Newton was an amazing scientist, really, in many ways, the father of modern science, with his laws of motion, famously his third law, Newton's third law about every action has an equal and opposite reaction, having laws that he devoted to universal gravitation, and indeed other things that he did which were amazing, like inventing the telescope or defining a color system. All these things he brought as contributions to science before some of his theories were superseded by relativity, or the theory of relativity. So with these two people, one in the arts and one in the sciences, we had two giants upon whom the shoulders of whom other people stood. So of course, as I said, the UK really succeeded in the world through economic ties, through economic links, through trade, through investment. And one person to whom we owe so much is Adam Smith. And Adam Smith was an 18th century economist who wrote a famous book called The Wealth of Nations, and he devised a universal system of economics. He's often known as the father of economics, the father of capitalism, some might have called him. But the point was, he was a person who tried to bring a universal theory of economics that everybody could understand, and upon which has been built some of the most modern economic ideas of our time. For our political system, we depend very much on a social contract, and that social contract underpins everything that we do and every way in which we relate to one another in our modern country. And therefore, all of it fits together very neatly, very efficiently. We have, of course, an economic system which is based on specialization and is based on trade between those who specialize. And then, of course, we have a political system which sets the laws, and then we have armed forces that defend the country. And I would draw people's attention to the fact that we call our Ministry of Defence. It is there to defend the country, to defend the social contract, to defend our prosperity against anybody who would wish to attack it or would wish to destabilize it. My government, for my people, the British people, the obvious number one problem that we see for the world is global warming and climate change. And for that reason, we were proud to host COP26 in Glasgow a year and a half ago, and then partner with Egypt on COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last November, because this number one problem, keeping global warming within limits of 1.5 degrees, is the existential issue that our world faces above all things. I think the way to overcome a problem like global warming is through collective action. It is through civilizations like Egypt, like Britain's, coming together to solve the problem together. It is a very complex problem because it requires governments, the private sector, the financial sector, civil society, regions, all to come together in one discussion about how to proceed. And of course, one cannot forget here the role of the United Nations in bringing together all of our countries to facilitate this discussion. And if we succeed in doing two things, mitigating the rise in temperature to below 1.5 degrees and adapting to the challenges of global warming and adapting our civilizations, then we may just get through for ourselves and coming generations. And I would add a third thing, which we were impressed by in Egypt's presidency of COP27, and that, of course, is compensation for loss and damage for those who are most vulnerable and have already lost the most from climate change. So I would reject the idea of a clash of civilizations. I think that serves the agendas of people who benefit from conflict and benefit from disagreement and ultimately prosper only for themselves, not for all. So the first principle is to put aside an idea that there is an inevitable clash of civilizations. On the contrary, civilizations that work can understand each other and can cooperate with each other. And I would say, I would pick out two examples of the cooperation that I have between my country and that of Egypt. There is a strong people-to-people connection. Civilizations understand each other. We have ties in every field, and some of the most extraordinary Egyptians are advancing British society, and there's some great Brits advancing Egyptian society. So the call is an easy one, that good civilizations work together naturally. Maybe diplomacy is it's the sharian, it's the artery of interconnection between civilizations. Diplomats are sent abroad to connect, to understand, above all to listen, and then to report back to their own societies, their own civilizations, about what a way forward could be. Diplomats are employed in the service of their civilizations to encourage connection between civilizations and between peoples. A good diplomat gets that right. A bad diplomat ignores the signs, is disrespectful to the other, and ultimately cannot understand or benefit his own country or her own country. So a good diplomat is a connector. Without civilization, we don't have a better life. Civilization is the ability of people to understand one another and respect one another and build together. Egyptians knew this instinctively through the most extraordinary civilizations that stretch back almost 8,000 years by my count. And the basis of what I see in the country, the most successful way that this civilization can advance is through mutual respect and communication and understanding of the other. And through that road leads naturally a better future.